had another day, or if I ever came back, we would go much more experiential in learning what I'm speaking about, in learning how to center ourselves. We do deep listening exercises, and you'd experience this. But while I'm here for this moment, for this day, I want to now invite you to experience one of the most important practices, quote, techniques, so to speak, of a humanistic approach. If your mind is wondering, what is going on? What is Dr. Umbright doing? Focus on breath. If you're getting nervous because of the silence and you want me to talk more, focus on breath. Just breathe deeper. Learning to close the mouth, to be still, is a very core principle of healing from many, many cultures. Not just healing of conflict, but spiritual healing, physical healing, as I mentioned earlier. Now that was just a few minutes. When I was a much younger man, I would never have done what I just did. I would have been embarrassed. I would have felt uncomfortable. Perhaps some of you felt a little nervous, like what is going on? But what we just experienced in those 2 or 3 minutes is beginning to learn to work with our own energy. I've emphasized it many times, and this is an example as a trainer. I keep restating it in different ways or different experiences. Learning to be present with other people in a way that we're really listening deeply, that we're mindful of our egos. If we're thinking of what we're going to do tonight or tomorrow, or we're making judgment of these people in the conference, when we're mindful of that, focus on breath. Because focusing on breath helps break the energetic bond of what's going on with our ego and our thoughts. Let me give you some very practical, real examples of this. And by the way, I want to make something very, very clear. I'm no expert on deep listening. Just ask my wife or my kids or grandkids. I've learned over the years to be mindful of my energy and to tap into deeper listening. But there's times when my ego gets going way too much and too busy with things, and I don't listen well. But when I am working with people or am with friends or family where I feel the energy of conflict, of nervousness, of anger, of trauma, of something like, then I've learned to be mindful of that, to focus on my breath, to let go of my thoughts of busyness, and I've got to do this, that, and the other, and to be very present with the person. Let me give you an example. And this is an example of Mark Albright screwing up. I'm saying that kiddingly, but this is an example. I'm doing a pre-conference meeting with a woman whose daughter was murdered. And I'm deep listening. She's telling her story. And, you know, I've heard many, many stories like this over the years and been very touched by them. And I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this, but I want to be real with you. So I'm listening to this woman tell me this painful story about her, what happened. And I found my mind drifting. I started to think, oh gosh, I've got to do this tonight, and I've got this meeting to go to tomorrow. Fortunately, I was mindful of that. I was not proud of myself. That's real. And when I was mindful of that, I focused on breath, breathing deeper. And that helped me let go of all those thoughts, all those other things, to be present again with that person. I hope you understand that in the translation. Let me give you another example where I integrated part of what I learned in China in 1997 through my Qigong practice. I was working on a case, of a mother who killed her 2 young children, her babies. She was not a criminal. She was an emotionally very damaged person. This happened out of mental illness. And her husband, several years later, they were divorced. He came to me, was referred to me, because he realized he's still connected with his ex-wife through their children, even though their children are gone. And he initiated, he was the victim, one of the victims, indirectly. He initiated the process of wanting to meet his former wife in prison in Minnesota. Because he knew he needed to talk about his pain and his suffering with his former wife. He still obviously loved the children that were gone. And they still shared their love for the children, even though they were separated. So I went about all of the preparation over probably about 10 months of preparation with the former husband who initiated the process, the victim, a lot of preparation in prison with his former wife. There were probably 5 pre-conference meetings plus telephone calls. And the day the dialogue was scheduled at the prison happened to be a very busy day for me. I had a lot of other things going on. Normally, part of my preparation is not just reading stuff or preparing the people, it's preparing me. I try to, before dialogues that are particularly intense, I try to spend time in meditation for a while, walking in nature where I have green. The energy of greenness in nature is very important for me. It helps me get more centered. I did not have time to do that this day. I got in my car and was going out to the prison and thinking of all of these things that I needed to do. And I got to the prison, went to the room to check out the room where the dialogue was going to happen in the prison to see how the seats were set up. And I realized, I became mindful of the fact, oh my gosh, my mind is, I'm thinking too much of to-do lists, of what I've got to do later, tonight or tomorrow. And so, when I became mindful of that, I did something that might sound strange to you, but I'm going to share it with you. I realized I needed to take time to work with my own energy to become more centered. So what I did, I went trying to think how I can say this with this be appropriate. I went to the men's room, the men's toilet in a women's prison, which is solitude. There aren't a lot of men going to a toilet in a women's prison. I didn't need to go to the toilet. I just needed private space. Went in the men's room, the toilet, went in a stall, closed the door in the stall, and I stood there and did something I learned in Beijing in 1997, Qigong movement. The qi flows, the energy release is through the meridians and comes very much out of palms of hands. And I stood there in the prison, in a toilet, in a stall. I can't believe I'm telling you this. And went like this, directing energy toward the Dantian, which is a very powerful energetic spot recognized by different cultures. And I just was like this, closed my eyes, took a few deep breaths, followed my breath, thought of being in a beautiful place in nature, perhaps in Don Park, or that on a mountaintop somewhere. Just a beautiful place that brings me peace. And I only did this for a couple minutes. And that brought me back into the present. Then I went back into the room where the dialogue was going to be. And I was in a different state of consciousness. I was able to tame my ego. And I became far more able to be fully present with the people. I hope this translates in a way that you understand. Many of my American colleagues or European colleagues would wonder, what is he talking about? I'm not kidding. When I was in my 20s, if I heard a trainer say what I just said, I would have thought, oof. But again, I'm not saying this to you like you must do it this way. No. I'm just sharing with you ways to learn to be more present, ways that I've learned from your culture, you can learn from me. My Native American friends have taught me much. And again, I do not pretend to be any expert on other cultures, not at all. But I am here to say that I have learned the deepest wisdom about the effectiveness of peacemaking and healing, not from books. Books are helpful. I've written books, but they're helpful. But that's not where the deepest wisdom has come from. It's come from listening, experiencing the energy of different cultures and wisdom. I want to, in a few moments, go over and talk about the handout that you have related to the art of becoming a trainer in restorative justice. But before I do that, I want to open up it to any last questions you might have about this humanistic approach. Does it feel like something that fits well with Taiwanese culture, Chinese culture? Do you have any last questions before we move on? Mindfulness-based approaches are grounded very much in Asian culture. They are becoming increasingly well-known in the West, in Europe, in the United States. Jon Kabat-Zinn has done an incredible job of developing mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is taught all over the world. He has been able to bring the wisdom of Buddhist tradition, particularly, in a way that Americans and Westerners can relate to without having to get into all of the spirituality and all of the things culturally that might make certain Westerners uncomfortable. He's been able to bring the core wisdom in a way that increasingly hospitals are integrating mindfulness-based approaches in Western medicine. And in the 1960s and 70s, that stuff began to come into America, but was very fringe. Very few people, mainly in California. Today, it's entering the mainstream, very, very much more accepted. I need to make something clear so you don't leave with misperceptions. Most trainers and practitioners in restorative justice in Europe, in Canada, in America, and certain other countries, the vast majority would not be speaking of mindfulness. That's the weird Mr. Umbright, Dr. Umbright. They would be very judgmental of me. And I don't mean that to criticize them. I mean, it's earlier in my career, I would have been critical of someone like me. Mindfulness? Meditation? Working with breath? Give me a break. Train me the skills. Tell me the skills. I would have been that judgmental. My life journey has, I've learned this stuff with mindfulness more out of trauma within my own life and people I've worked with and families. It's not just from books. Books are very helpful. But the way I have taught for years, and my recent writings and trainings I'm really doing right now in other states and some other countries, it's a mindfulness-based approach to restorative dialogue. A mindfulness-based approach to restorative dialogue is very different than most training you would get in restorative justice. And I do not mean that the other training is bad. No. Depends on what you want. A mindfulness-based approach is a different paradigm, a different way of understanding it and how to practice it. And in therapy, in psychotherapy, mindfulness-based approach is being found to be very helpful. And here's again the paradox. Restorative justice dialogue is not psychotherapy, but particularly with a mindfulness-based approach, it is incredibly therapeutic in a very natural way. And it's a paradox. It's not psychotherapy, but it's very therapeutic. Research has shown that over the years in practice. Other questions on humanistic approach? The prosecutors and head prosecutors and chief prosecutors that I've met in the Ministry of Justice through some of my travels seem to have a pretty good understanding of a humanistic approach. Doesn't mean all do, but at least the ones I've been exposed to, they seem to have a good response. in regard to how long of a time, spending years or months, this is very important. Now, my understanding is many of you have a very short time limit. The prosecutors say, you've got to get the case back to us within a certain time. Very important to understand what I'm going to say. If cases are referred by prosecutors or police or judges, there are going to be tighter limits. The case I mentioned to you and that I've done over the years with parents of murdered children or children of murdered parents, real violent cases, remember, they happen many years after the courts have handled the case. The prisoner's been convicted, is in prison. So therefore, in those kind of cases, well, the longest preparation is actually in a film I left with here that's on YouTube and has been shown on television in the States. The film is called Being with the Energy of Forgiveness. And one of the cases there was a woman I worked with. I think I spent 2.5, 3 years pre-conference with different meetings. We were ready to go, and then she needed more time, plus my crazy schedule with travel got in the way. So when severe violent cases come to you through victim initiation, there's no time schedule, none. It's not like you must get the case done in 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or a year. You follow the energy and needs of the person who has been traumatized and victimized. If they need 3 years of preparation, 4 years of preparation, that's what you do. Or if it seems because of the circumstances and their own strength, they only need 3 months of preparation. And there are programs in the United States, and I've done research on these. It's in my book, Facing Violence, which is out there. Some programs, routinely, it's 3 to 4 months of preparation, even in these severe violent cases that come to you years later after the person's in prison. That can work. The point is, there is no hard protocol in the United States saying that every case coming into restorative justice dialogue through victim offender mediation must be done within a set period of time. Frankly, that is oftentimes partly negotiated with your local system, with prosecutors or judges or probation office, wherever you're getting the referrals. You've got to work it out with them. What is realistic? What do the courts need? And what's realistic with the people you're working with?